Welcome to Inspired. I'm Alexa Von Tobel. When we think about innovation, we often picture sleek new products or billion-dollar valuations, but some of the most powerful breakthroughs begin in a far more uncertain place, with bold ideas that seem impossible, impractical, and to put it bluntly, are crazy. That's exactly where today's guest thrives. Astro Teller is the captain of Moonshots at X, Alphabet's ambitious innovation lab that's tackled everything from self-driving cars to high-altitude internet balloons. His job is to lead teams through the messy, magical process of turning science fiction into reality. But Astro's moonshot mindset didn't begin at Google. Before X, he founded and led 5 companies, including Body Media, a pioneer in wearable health tech that predated the Fitbit by nearly a decade. He's also a researcher, an engineer, a professor, a novelist, and a PhD in artificial intelligence from Carnegie Mellon. Astro has spent his career sitting at the edge of what's possible, combining scientific rigor with entrepreneurial risk-taking. He holds dozens of patents, has authored multiple books, has built a life around chasing ideas that others might dismiss as too weird, too early, or too hard. In this episode, you'll hear how Astro thinks about failure, how he leads teams through high-risk experimentation, and what he's learned from a life spent searching for the future. This conversation is a deep dive into radical innovation and what it means to really build and take a moonshot. If you're running a startup, we know things like managing equity and communicating with investors are always top of mind. Carta has built a connected suite of tools that over 40,000 companies use to do just that. Their platform of software and services helps you lay the groundwork so you can focus on building. To learn more or get started, visit carta.com. Happy Friday, welcome.
Happy Friday. Thank you for doing this with me, Alexa. I'm really excited. And you sent me some thoughts ahead of time about what we might talk about. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun doing this.
Well, good. I'm glad you liked my questions. We've done a ton of research, and I'm just let's dive right in here. I want to start from the beginning. Your origin story. You were born in Cambridge, England, in 1970. Shortly after your father completed his PhD in philosophy at MIT, and he began a postdoc at Queen's College in England. You were 2.5 years old, and when we look back at your family, and I want to literally start from the beginning. Your grandfather, Edward Teller, the theoretical physicist and chemical engineer, widely known as the father of the hydrogen bomb. Your maternal grandfather was awarded a Nobel Prize in economics. Your father was a philosopher and professor in quantum mechanics. And your mother was a clothing designer before getting multiple masters in psychology. You come from a really dumb family. I want to just start from the beginning. What was it like growing up in a household of such underachievers, and how do you think that shaped you?
There's probably a lot to be said about that, but the person you didn't mention, and it had a sizable impact on me, was my brother. It was clear from the time I was maybe 7 years old that my brother was meaningfully smarter than me. And in a household in which how smart you were defined you, the fact that I had lost before the race had really even started, I think shaped my life considerably. I don't know if you remember, but Avis had these commercials in the 70s and 80s. Their tagline was, "We try harder."
We try harder, Avis. Avis, we don't know another way.
And there was something about that really resonated with me, because I knew I wasn't going to win, whatever the hell that means, get attention, get affection in my family, because of how smart I was. And that was complicated because how smart you were was sort of how the whole extended family rotated. And so from an early age, I leaned more into my creativity, into how hard I worked and pushed myself. I got really interested in how other humans tick and the ways in which people don't do the things they say they're going to do, but end up doing things that are because of motivations that are hidden inside them instead of the sort of intellectual things they say they're motivated by. So I think a lot of how I'm wired, a lot of where I'm coming from now, stems from this feeling from when I was 7. Being smart is ultimately what matters, but I can't win at that game, so I have to find some way to kind of make up for that.
First of all, I very much appreciate that. I have some smart siblings as well, and so I've always worked really hard. How do you think their achievements shaped your view on risk taking?
In some ways, I'm not sure because, especially my two grandfathers were so successful, and seen from the outside, it didn't look like they made a lot of mistakes. But my father's father, Edward, frequently said when I was a kid something that I thought was actually, until like a year ago, I thought that this was a quote of his. I've since learned that it was actually a Niels Bohr quote that he was repeating. He never said it was from him. I just assumed it was, which is an expert in any field is someone who's made the majority of the mistakes in that field. And so I'm not sure their resumes were where I learned about failure, but that particular statement resonated to me as particularly true, that there wasn't a shortcut where you could just read the books. The definition of an expert is someone who'd gone out and made the mistakes, the relevant, critical training mistakes that it takes to become an expert in anything.
It's so true. It's like whoever is actually the best in the field has made the most mistakes, and that's maybe a better way to think about it. That feels right, Astro. You, in your childhood, you said it was filled with a lot of inward thinking, inwardly focused, full of reading and big ideas. You now are responsible for thinking about the biggest ideas that mankind can think about, which I think is a pretty rad job. And I admire greatly that you get to do that all day. If you have to go back to your childhood, can you just give me a sense of something that really stands out that you think helped get you here today?
I mean, I was definitely a dreamer. I've learned other skills over time, but the think big thing, the sort of romantic, not necessarily just in the, amour sense, but in this sort of big ideas sense, that came quite naturally to me. I think one of the things that married with that in sort of fairly innate sense that I had when I was young was my father's father told stories with great affection, nostalgia about the Manhattan Project. Not the bomb part of it. He mostly didn't talk about the fact that the United States was in the middle of a war at the time, but the fact that a few hundred of the smartest and most interesting people in the world, most of whom were like really pretty wild characters, all got sequestered on this mesa top in New Mexico for years, living like literally it was a boys' school. It was like this outdoor natural wonderland that they made this like summer camp for people with like an IQs of 160. And they were trying to do things together that had never been done before. And he had all of these happy memories and stories from this time, just sort of like all of these people, sort of their ideas clashing into each other and all of the really amazing things that sparked. I think that stuck with me. I had no interest in making bombs, or I wasn't particularly good at physics, but there was something about getting really special people together into a place where they were somewhat protected and seeing what they could do together that like I attached to from an idée fixe kind of way from when I was maybe 8 years old. And, so maybe it's not totally an accident that here I am trying to cause one of those things now later in my life.
Astro, that is so cool. That is such a direct connection from like the huddle in a corner in a place of safety and let's dream up impossible things and make them happen. Can you give us, is there a story that somebody told you about those times that like really stands out that would be fun to share?
So, I mean, one of the things that my grandfather was very known for, just to give you an example, but I'm going to tell you another one, which maybe is more hard to find, let's say. My grandfather was very known for playing. He brought a Steinway grand piano to this tiny place and would play, and he was a very good pianist, but he played quite bombastically, and like Steinway grands make a lot of sound. And so like late at night, he would be pounding out Beethoven and like keeping like half of the community awake. So he was sort of known for playing what became known as the monster, not Edward, but his piano. But one of my stories from that time is obviously I was not alive at that time, but many, many years later, another graduate student who was a graduate student in artificial intelligence at the same time I was, who actually now works here at X, came to me a little bit frustrated. Like, why do you have 10 times, more than 10 times as many citations as I do, Astro, on this sort of Sightseer, this site for how many times each computer scientist has been cited? He just was like, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem fair. And I was like, I don't know. So we dug into it together, and almost all of my citations were a credit to an A period teller from 1946, I think. The original paper describing the Monte Carlo method of trying a lot of things at random as a way to sort of figure out how stuff works by just trying a lot of variations on something is the Teller, Metropolis, and Hastings paper. And the A teller, it was A teller and E teller, was Augusta, my grandmother, who never
Wow.
published another thing, but the one thing she published was by itself cited, literally 10 times more than all of my papers combined. She apparently also, I've heard conflicting stories. One that Grace Hopper, who found the original computer bug, but another story actually claims that my grandmother, who was one of the very first programmers in the world on the ENIAC at Los Alamos, found the original computer bug, which was a moth that had landed and like shorted. The two wires were close to each other. A moth landed and kind of shorted across the two wires. And she debugged the computer by like literally pulling the bug out.
Wait, oh my God, that is an incredible story. That's why we call it debugging.
So I'm confident that the story is true. Whether it was my grandmother or Grace Hopper, I'm not totally sure because I've heard both with confidence. So I don't know.
We'll go with it. There was one thing that I also wanted to dig into that I thought was so interesting about you, Astro. Apparently, you had a pivotal moment when you were 13. You were hiking with your dad in the Grand Tetons, and I really want to dig into this because for me, it really stands out. But you had a significant realization that how others perceive you, a human, really matters. What happened? What was that moment? What did you learn?
Before I tell the story, I love my dad. So this is not a knock on my dad. But I was like a 13-year-old kid. So I
Yep.
was embarrassed by my dad, as most people are. And we were going
Fair.
up the trail, and it was me, my brother, and my dad. And there was a young couple coming down the trail. And my dad said, hi, and they said hi back in a very friendly way and walked past us. And that was the strongest epiphany I've ever had in my entire life. I can't explain why that moment is what caused the click. But in rapid succession, I thought, they don't know what a dork my dad is. Oh, wait. They couldn't know what a dork my dad is because they only had that one experience of my dad. And they're judging him based on all that they could see in that like moment that they had with him. And then that connected to, well, I guess you could try to be fake in your life and just broadcast like a mask of who you are and how you want people to experience you. And that doesn't work. That's what most people do. And everyone can kind of tell, at least, intuitively, that that's sort of fake and icky, even though that's how most humans are most of the time, is that they're like wearing weird like mask and armor to protect themselves from the rest of the world because they're too afraid to share who they really are. So you want to craft how people experience you, but being fake isn't the answer. So the right answer is you have to find a way to be yourself on purpose, which is sort of like being an author of your own life, both in the very broad sense in which you get to not just live your life, but make it, create it, and think of it as an act of creation. But also in each moment, you can choose how you show up. And that doesn't mean be authentic. And that's the tricky bit, is how do you do it on purpose while still being deeply real and in who you are? And I like somehow saw all this in 1 second. And then it's taken me, another 40 years to get really good at it.
And to properly unpack it and live it. That's it First of all, what a deep epiphany, on a trail in the Grand Tetons. That's amazing, Astro. I'm loving the like multiple light bulbs that went off very quickly at the same time for you. I want to transition a little bit because you have just such an incredibly impressive academic background, which is now that we know your genetic lineage here does not seem surprising. But you got your bachelor's of computer science from Stanford, followed by master's in science in symbolic and heuristic computation, also from Stanford. Then you went to complete your PhD in artificial intelligence at Carnegie Mellon, where you were also a Hertz Foundation fellow. And I'm not going to even there's even more after that. A professor and engineer and researcher at Phoenix Laser Technologies. When you think about what was motivating you through your academic career, what mattered? Like why get all of those degrees? What was driving you, Astro?
I'm really embarrassed, but kind of like apropos what I was just saying, I'm missing that filter that most people have, so I'm just going to tell you the truth. My family had the attitude that many families have about high school. Like, you just finish high school, then you'll see what you're going to do. In our family, it was more like, well, what will you do after you get your PhD? Like, I didn't think very hard about doing a PhD. And actually, I taught a class at Stanford before I finished my undergrad time, not afterwards. Weird other story. But because I taught a class my fourth year as an undergrad at Stanford, it turned out that I could get paid 3 times as much and not have to pay tuition if I was a master's student. They didn't have a mechanism for properly paying undergrads to teach a class. So I agreed to do a master's degree while I was doing my undergrad degree. It was called a coterm. And then because I'd done that for a year, I was like, okay, I might as well finish my master's degree. It was only going to be 1 more year. So I did my undergrad and my master's in 5 years. And after I finished my master's, I was applying to graduate schools, but I did apply to work at just 3 or 4 labs. And in retrospect, I was not very nice about it, but I applied to several places, like what was the leftovers of Bell Labs, Microsoft Research, a few other places. And I said, hi, I would like to run your lab. And all of them, I think, just sort of short-circuited and like tried to get me out of the room as fast as possible. But the guy who was interviewing for Microsoft Research had the decency to say to me, we can afford to wait until after you have your PhD to have this conversation. So I said, okay, see you in 5 years. Like, that was the one moment where I actually considered not getting a PhD. But then when he said, no, you need to have a PhD in order to run Microsoft Research, I'm very happy where I am now. But that was me even back then wanting to be doing something like X. So that's the answer to got a PhD. Is there was some default in there? Maybe that's not a great answer, but that's kind of the truth. The artificial intelligence part of it was a bit different.
Yeah, tell me.
When I applied to Stanford, I actually told them I was going to do political science. I was good at a bunch of stuff, but I was really interested in how the world worked. So that's what I declared as. And then when I got there, I had so many APs that I'd gotten a 5 on, and they weren't willing to give me more than a year's worth of college credit. So I don't know why they picked computer science, but they said, we're not giving you any credit for your AP in your advanced placement test for computer science. But if you take a 1-quarter course, which is a survey of computer science at Stanford, we'll give you a whole year's worth of credit, 3-quarter. And I say, okay, fine, I'll take that 1 course. And I did. And the TA in that class, whose name was Nick Parlante, was so out of his mind excited about computer science. I thought, shit, I want to be that excited about what I'm doing. Maybe I'll do computer science. So what I didn't know was that was Nick's first time ever TAing. Fun. So he was partly out of his mind because he liked computer science, but he was also out of his mind because it was his first time being a TA.
Yep.
And he went on to be one of the, I don't know, 3 or 4 most beloved lecturers in the history of Stanford. So
Wow.
I just got really lucky that I got Nick at this time in my life. And luckily, I have since gotten to like find Nick again and tell him what a big impact he had on my life in this very unintentional way. Then from computer science, I'm smart, but I'm more creative than I'm smart. I'm not even sure creative is the right word. I'm mentally flexible.
Say more. Say more about what does that mean, Astro?
Well, I will, but artificial intelligence was like the Wild West back in the like 1990 was when I really started doing artificial intelligence as an undergraduate. And that just allowed for a lot more, like, relatively speaking, there's some things like operating systems where how creative and mentally flexible you are is just not as important as the rigor of your computer science-ness. And I was okay on the rigor, but it just wasn't my first skill. There were things like artificial intelligence where people just were like, what is this going to be 30, 40, 50 years from now? And that lent to both to my strengths, but also to my excitement about life and the unknown. So I drifted into artificial intelligence because it sort of just matched me in that way.
I feel your natural level of enthusiasm for the things that you do. It's like I can physically grab it, Astro. It's incredible. Uh, Quick side topic, because it's not a quick side topic, but we'll cover it quickly, which is writing. You have written many books, literally ranging from sci-fi thrillers to social satire, in even tandem with family members. Give us just a quick sense of what has made you write some of these books, and maybe which book are you most proud of? Again, I couldn't even necessarily name them all, but what's made you write a bunch of books?
First of all, I was a voracious reader when I was a kid, and like a lot of voracious readers, one of the first things I wanted to be when I was a kid was a writer, because that was just like how I was experiencing the world was through books. So I held on to some of that sort of romantic idea of being a writer. Related to this issue of being mentally flexible, I think my real strength is as a storyteller. It turns out what I'm best at, arguably, is taking complex ideas and making them simple and clear and compelling. And that doesn't make you a great writer, but the task of being a writer and sort of showing an arc for a person or a group of people, making it a puzzle and an adventure that you can bring the reader along through, that is not unrelated to the more general issue of kind of an architecture for understanding something, which is how I think of storytelling. I've enjoyed lots of them. Exegesis, the first novel that I wrote, is now weirdly prophetic. Sort of the LLM explosion we're living through was, accidentally, I just got lucky, whatever, but kind of pretty directly forecast by this a novel that I published in 1997.
Which is so cool, by the way. I mean, that is truly just shows how much you live into the future, in stark contrast to most human beings.
I'm not sure it worked out perfectly, but I had a blast. I wrote and sold a film to Paramount, to Cruise Wagner Productions when Tom Cruise was still at Paramount. That was really fun. Partly because just it was like pulling me in a new space. I wrote a novel after Exegesis called Among These Savage Thoughts that taught me a lot about iteration and how I could have done that better. I think in retrospect, a book that I have a lot of fondness for, but the pieces of it are gorgeous, but it didn't quite hold together. I was trying to do too much at the same time in the book. And I think if I'd iterated better on it, faster, and with being a little bit less precious about the ideas, I would have made it into a better book. So it was a good learning experience for me. I loved making Sacred Cows with my wife.
That's pretty cool, by the way, to write a book with your partner. That's very, very
A
fun.
little bit dangerous to write a book about marriage and divorce with your second wife.
Oh God, Astro, I wish we were drinking a glass of wine. I feel like you've got like
Amen.
so many stories in your head here. Okay, so basically, you wrote a lot of books. They've taught you things, and for you, you just admired writers because you were such an avid book reader that it was just for you is sort of a chapter of your life that you had to get to. Because I'm so focused on getting to talk about the future and all of the big moonshots that you're focused on, I want to cover your entrepreneur career, of which you've founded a number of businesses. I believe five. One that was acquired in 2013 by Jawbone for over $110 million. And the list is quite long. Founder of Body Media. One thing I'd like to ask is, as it pertains to getting you to Moonshots, you know what it takes to do hard things. Doing hard things is something I love. I love the challenge of it. You clearly just constantly keep raising the bar on yourself to do hard things. What do you think you learned about what it takes to be a good entrepreneur? What would you say that is?
I've heard a couple descriptions. I mean, an entrepreneur builds a business, arguably. An entrepreneur is something who makes something out of nothing. Someone once described it as like an entrepreneur's core job is to go into a 6-gun shootout with no bullets in your gun and come out at least surviving and ideally having shot a few of the baddies.
Actually, I was going to say your job, you have no bullets, but somehow you have to win.
Exactly, right. I think that there is a scrappiness and open to learning. There's a certain kind of well-meaning ferociousness that you have to be a successful entrepreneur. There are people who are successful entrepreneurs who lean into skills that I don't have, at least a very high amount of, and I don't even really support. There's a certain kind of walk over hot coals, blast through all walls attitude that is lionized, especially here in Silicon Valley. And in the right moments, in the right ways, that can be very powerful, but it gets seriously misused and it becomes an excuse for some really destructive and unethical behavior. And I've always been more interested in the truth and in relationships than I am in winning. So that's just not been my way of being an entrepreneur. I understand that works for some people, but that's not the version of entrepreneurship that I'm excited about.
It's funny. You're absolutely right that in your life you get to choose different flavors. And one thing, Astro, it sounds like you and I are very values aligned on this. I think who surrounds you in business rubs off on how you think about the world. And I got really lucky that I had some incredibly good mentors who always did the right thing, always kind of took the high road. My co-founder of Inspired is Penny Pritzker, for example, current chair of Harvard's board, doing big things. And you just said something so great, which was that you can pick your flavor of winning, and there's different flavors, but you've always focused on relationships because my guess is they help you accomplish wonderful things and you can do it in a way that's really joyful. So I like your flavor a lot there, Astro. Before we get to Moonshots, what do you think was the hardest thing that you learned as a repeat entrepreneur that in the rearview mirror, it taught you about how to be a better human?
The biggest sort of pivot for myself as a manager and leader happened very early in the process. Despite what I said earlier, I was still pretty heavily intellectualizing my life by the time I became a CEO for the first time. And when I became a CEO for the first time, I had never had a manager. For summers, but other than for summers, I'd never had a manager. I had never read a business book, and I was a CEO. And so at some level, I believed that the job of a CEO was to play speed chess with each of your employees, where if I knew how to do your job better than you, then I could hold you accountable for it and teach you how to do it. And so I was trying to do that as the company was growing. And by the time we were at 20 people, that completely fell apart, as you might imagine. Spoiler alert for anyone listening, that is not how to be a good CEO.
It's a
It's a
rough way to be a
horrible way to be a
CEO.
CEO. It's horrible. But I got to this moment of crisis in my life where I had the clarity. I have to either give up the issue of smartness as being a core piece of what defines me, or I have to give up being a CEO, because these two things are not compatible. You can be a smart CEO, but you can't be a CEO by being smart. Like, how smart you are doesn't make the top 5 list of things that make you a good CEO. And I spent a month in crisis, and I decided I was more interested in trying to learn this thing I had signed up for, being a CEO, than in defining myself by being smart. So then I said, okay, I guess I'm going to define myself for right now and how good I am in whatever this thing is, but I don't really know what this thing is because I'm abandoning my previous definition of it. And because I'm mildly dyslexic, so I just don't read business books. I read for fun for some reason, but I don't read nonfiction really. I do some, but not a ton. So my way of being in the world is very relational. So I just got really curious. I just started going around and asking people, how do you do your job? When I asked you to do this thing and then you did that other thing instead, I'm not mad at you. Just, I'm curious. Why? And the more I dug in, the more interested I got in this gap between what people say they're going to do or what the CEO asks them to do and how they actually behave. And I've come to think of the CEO's job, both as a leader and as a manager, not the same thing, as trying to get those two vectors, which point in very different directions, what people say they're going to do or you ask them to do and what they actually do, try and get those vectors to point in the same direction, to be the same vector. And I think of that as culture engineering, is trying to create an environment where the things you hope they do and you ask them to do are actually the things that they go do. There's other things about being a manager and leader, but that's how I came to understand being a CEO.
To your point, being a great CEO doesn't necessarily have to do with intelligence. Intelligence is helpful, by the way, but there's so much of it is there. It's true tactics and skill sets and communication and listening and direction and visioning. And so I think that was well said, which is like, it's not necessarily pure intelligence that is powerful in the role. Okay, Astro, the thing I'm dying to talk to you about, moonshots. First of all, what the hell is moonshots? And I love that your title is Captain of Moonshots, which, Astro, I don't think I've met a person with more interesting names and titles. What is Moonshots? What are you doing inside of Google? What's the purpose of it? The Moonshot Factory. And then I want to dive into some of the things that you're working on that are just profoundly interesting.
Maybe I'll start here. The way we define a moonshot is with 3 core ingredients. And we would only call something a moonshot if it has all 3 of these things. 1, there has to be a huge problem with the world that you can name and want to solve. If you don't have that, it's just academic. 2, there has to be some kind of science fiction sounding product or service that, however unlikely it is you could make it, we can agree ahead of time if you could make it, it would probably solve that huge problem with the world. And then 3, there has to be some reason to believe that that's not just a fantasy, some kind of technology breakthrough or opportunity that gives us at least a prayer of making that science fiction sounding product or service that would then allow us to go solve that huge problem with the world. Once you have those 3 things, we would call that a moonshot story hypothesis. And that's our job here at X, the Moonshot Factory, is to form moonshot story hypotheses and then to test them. So if you worked here at X, welcome to X, Alexa.
Hi.
We would say, 1, massive kudos to you every time you find one of these things. High five. And you're almost certainly wrong. It's not because of you. If I bring up one, it's almost certainly wrong. Like our batting average is about 1%.
Wow.
By definition, if we're going to try to come up with things that don't sound reasonable, if you bring up something that sounds reasonable, we're not interested by definition of what I just said before. If it's obvious and it's likely to work and it's just hard work and money, that's not our job. Like the rest of the world will go do that without us. They don't need us for that. If we're pre-signing up to be explorers, to go find things that can't be well defined and are quite possibly just not there, we have to have the audacity to start each adventure. That's why you get the high five for proposing it. But we have to have equally high humility that it's probably not right. And so our entire job is to get evidence that it's not right so we can gracefully move on from that exploration and get on to the next exploration, which has some chance of being even more valuable.
Okay, so Astro, let's talk about some of the moonshots. Give us 3 of them, just so we can really wrap our head around 3 of them that maybe are the most out there.
Let me start by saying that for people who are listening to this and would like to learn more, because we can't talk through all of these right now, X is 15 years old now. And now that we're 15, we wanted to take a pause and find a way to sort of share some with the world more broadly, because we've been a pretty secretive place. And so we've created a podcast series. If you want to find it, you can just look for X, the Moonshot Factory, Moonshot Podcast. Just search for that and you'll find it. And this is an oral history about some of the amazing people and amazing projects that have come through X. And true to our sort of shtick, we don't just talk about the ones that succeeded. We're also talking about some of the things that didn't work, because you learn from the stuff that doesn't work.
Correct.
And when you're in denial, when you just try to pretend that it was all success, that's never the actual story.
Ever. Quite literally ever.
Yes, exactly. I'll give you a few examples now, though. The 3 that are probably the best known, Google Brain, which is one of the things that caused the explosion of machine learning around the world over the last 15-ish years, started about 15 years ago at X. Waymo, the self-driving cars that I think most of your listeners would be familiar with, that started at X. Wing, the drones for package delivery, that started at X. Google Glass, that started at X. Verily, the life science business for Alphabet, that started at X. Intrinsic, which is the Alphabet's moonshot for industrial robotics, that started at X. So I can give you lots more examples, but those are some that some of your listeners may well know.
Give us an example of 1 or 2 that's sort of now frontier out there, 15 to 20 years. I just want to get a sense of the craziest ones, Astro, and then I want to talk about how you create an environment that lets people have such crazy big ideas, and how do you create that level of safety for people to go do things that are, to your point, most likely to horribly fail.
Let me give you an arc. All of these things sounded unreasonable when we started. Of course, our job, if we've been doing them for a long time, they sound less crazy by the time we are successful. But that's survivor bias, to be clear. We start lots of crazy things that did, in fact, turn out to just be crazy, so we stop them. But many of your listeners may be aware of the Loon project. These were stratospheric balloons that had cell towers hanging under them. This came from X. So we worked on this for a long time. It was our way of trying to get internet connectivity to the rural parts of the world. And it was an amazing team. We were really proud of the attempt. But ultimately, it was working technically and operationally, but we couldn't make the business as profitable as we thought. So we closed it down. It's very sad. Lots to learn there. And those balloons used to talk to each other by shooting lasers at each other. So they were beaming 4G LTE and 5G down to the ground so people could use their handsets. But they had much thicker bandwidth between them so they could make an ad hoc mesh network in the sky, and so that some of the balloons could connect down to fiber on the ground. As that project was ending, somebody said, hold on, I know you're not supposed to be able to do lasers on the ground. It doesn't work for a whole bunch of reasons. Smoke, fog, rain, blah, blah, blah. But what if we could make these lasers work on the ground? Maybe that's a good way to do internet connectivity for, the 3 billion people in the world who are underconnected or unconnected. That was 7 years ago. And we just had that project, which is called Tara, graduate from X literally a month ago. So they're off to races as an independent business. We're incredibly proud about them. They have a box about, this big. It's small, larger than a brick, smaller than a stoplight. It shoots a laser up to 20 kilometers. It's eye safe, unregulated because it's near visible light. It has to see another one of these boxes, but as long as those two boxes can see each other, you plug a fiber optic cable into one, and you get a fiber optic cable through the sky up to 20 kilometers. In fact, they've done up to 53, but their product specs only say up to 20 kilometers. 20 gigabits per second. You can put this up in an hour for tens of thousands of dollars. It would cost you 1,000 times that much to trench the fiber over those 20 kilometers.
Wow.
In easy scenarios, and more than 1,000 times if you were like in the middle of the city. So that by itself would be a pretty exciting business. But the reason that we're so excited about it is that box was just paving the way. In the background, that team built a chip about the size of a smushed pea, a little bit smaller than a smushed pea. That's not the computer. That chip actually takes light, splits it into thousands of different pieces that are all coherent. That means their phase is sort of wiggling together. And then they slow up some of the light that's coming out of all these little pieces in this tiny chip, just by a tiny bit, relative to the other ones, so they get them out of phase. They can calculate how the light will crash into itself, either constructively or destructively interfering. And what they get out of all of this light coming out of this tiny little chip is an electrically steerable laser. That means soon, like they have this working over kilometers out in the world now, they're going to be providing to the world lasers for talking to each other that don't require a gimbal, so you can kind of steer the laser, or MEMS mirrors, that's the fine pointing for lasers, or in most cases, even like the curved glass, the optics.
Wow.
It will change what we do with lasers as much as moving from tape drives to like a solid state flash memory has changed how we put memory into things.
Wow.
So I would expect telecommunications to move from radio frequencies to light over the next decade, and for Tara to be at the frontier of that. They're in like 20 countries, and they're moving more data every 15 minutes than the Loon project did in its entire 9-year history to customers in 20 countries, which is why we celebrate failure, because you learn from the things that don't work. It goes back into the dirt at X. We call it Moonshot compost. And then out of that compost, we get something like Tara.
First of all, thank you so much for giving the full circle. I think that is to your point. I always have the visuals in my mind, which is like success is 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 9 steps back, 40 steps forward. And that's a perfect example. I want to shift. I want to talk a little bit about Waymo, just because I've now had many rides in a Waymo. They're so cool. Not only I'm ready for Waymo to be everywhere. Just the productivity, the amount of time back, I felt safer, bluntly.
They're pretty
And
amazing.
I mean, it really is incredible. I FaceTime my kids actually, Astro, my little people, because they were so excited to see I was in a car that was driving itself. Talk a little bit about what you see that could be possible from Waymo in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Like, let us hear the predictions in your head of how that changes society.
I'll give you a few examples. Let me use a few from Waymo, but I'm going to use one or two from Wing also because I think people don't see it coming, but Wing's going to be as big a deal. But that's the next wave, but people are like already got there with Waymo. They haven't gotten there yet with package delivery. With Waymo, like here's an interesting example. When the world worked around buses, the corner bodegas where the bus stops were in cities, that real estate was worth more because that's where the bus stop was. And once we moved even just to like Uber and Lyft, transportation as a service, that started to change real estate prices. That's an example of something that's pre-Waymo, but where the world changed because how we moved around changed. You're going to see a whole series of those kinds of changes as people move farther and farther away from owning their own cars. People don't take transportation as a service more because it's expensive. Sometimes you're nervous about who's going to be driving you because they're chatty, because it's not private, because it's not clean. Obviously, the safety issues. If you could just solve all of those, have it be cheaper and better on all of those fronts, think of them as like micro buses that you could take to work. If you want to go on a vacation for a couple days, I don't know when exactly, but I'm sure at some point Waymo will just let you like lease it by the hour so that you can just take it. Like at some point, why would you even own a car anymore? And it's not clear you'll ever want to own the Waymo car, but you'll just use it for as long as you need it and then release it back into the world. And I think it's going to change a lot about the world. But because I think people have already been thinking about Waymo so much, I think your listeners would be interested to hear 1 to 2 years from now, they will experience wanting something, asking for it, and then having it be delivered out of the sky within minutes.
Wow.
I guarantee you, once you've had this experience, it is at least as like mind-boggling as a car that drives itself. It's like Harry Potter Owl Post. And it changes how you think about stuff. If you go to the grocery store, you have this like, oh God, it's like a bit of a haul to get here. So I need to stock up. And then if you forget something, you're like, oh God, I'll make do without it. Like, why are we stocking up? If that extra like pint of half and half could just fly to you in 1 minute, you wouldn't worry about having so much half and half that sometimes it goes bad and you pour it down the sink, which is crazy, because you could just ask for it whenever you needed it. You have batteries that are slowly discharging in a drawer in your house or apartment. I guarantee it.
Absolutely.
Because you just think it's too annoying to go get the batteries.
Absolutely.
If the batteries would just fly to you in like 1 minute, you would not worry about that.
So fast forward on that same thread.
Yeah.
Things can come from anywhere at any time for far more affordable. What's like a crazy way that changes our life?
Well, I think we're going to move from, at least to some extent, from an ownership society to an access society. So like the half and half and the batteries are one thing. I guarantee you own a hammer.
100% I own a hammer.
I
I
bet
use
you
it once every
use that
3
hammer.
years.
I bet you use that hammer less than one part in 10,000 of your life.
100% correct.
Right.
I mean, once every 5 years.
So 10,000 Alexas could share that one hammer. Like, wouldn't that be amazing if instead of trying to own the stuff that you need, if you really believed you could just have it when you need it, we could all be richer functionally by having what we need when we need it. We wouldn't need the storage space for it. The world wouldn't have its resources used up by our desire to own these things. In the same way that things like Airbnb or transportation as a service has changed our mentality, like, oh, I don't have to own a second home. I can just rent one when I want one. We're going to end up with that same experience of the world about stuff that can fit in a bread box. I think it's going to be pretty profound.
Okay, Astro, I want to talk to you for 5 more hours in life, and I'm going to force you to have lunch with me because you're just so
Sold.
incredible.
Sold.
I want to end on just a few simple questions here. The first is I want to know one thing that you, back to your Professor Nick, who was bubbling with enthusiasm. What makes you bubble with enthusiasm today? What are you most excited about as you look 10 years out? What's the thing that's getting you out of bed right now, Astro?
I'll pick one or two, but again, that's actually what our podcast is for. So I would encourage you, but also your listeners, if you listen to that, you can get like hours and hours of this kind of stuff. But here's an example or two. I mean, the first, and it really is kind of the truth. The thing I'm most excited about, the thing I bubbled about the most, is bubbling. I know that sounds circular, but what I mean is training people to have that audacity and humility in balance, helping them to unlearn a bunch of crappy behaviors that's been piled up on top of all of us since we were 5 years old, so we can rediscover our creativity and our humanity and like put it to work, being relational with each other, no office politics, like all that stuff that you would want, that you know in your heart would actually foment a Moonshot Factory. Trying to make and maintain a place like that actually gets me more excited than any of like the teleportation and cures for cancer that we sort of bang on around here. I get excited about those too, but seeing the people try, watching them be intellectually honest when it doesn't work, giving them a hug, helping them like get up and dust themselves off, that's even more exciting to me than the individual moonshots.
So, knowing that this podcast is about unlocking people's ambition to think bigger, be bigger, solve bigger problems, and you are probably one of the very, very few people walking on this earth who's created that environment, back to sort of your childhood dream of being out in the desert, sequestered, safe, allowed to go and do really hard things. What would you say, outside of comfort with failure, is one other thing that you try to do and that we can all take away from this to help ourselves think bigger?
Maybe it's a distant cousin of the failure point, but the only thing on the door of my office is a poster of the tarot card of the Fool. I think that there's a lot that can be learned from being willing to be foolish, heading out on an adventure where you don't know where you're going, being able to remove protective barriers between you and the world, seeing side quests not as a distraction, but as actually kind of the point in the end. I think you can unpack a lot about the metaphor of the beginner's mind and what it means to be expert, to have the skills of an expert, but to still be able to show up in conversations with an openness and a lack of judgment and a lack of preconceptions that enables like brainstorming and helps you get to unusual places that expertise sometimes is like a mental prison that prevents you from getting to. Now, I don't know if you can do all those things if you are deeply uncomfortable with failure, but it is somewhat different than that. It's more than that.
You have to be comfortable not only potentially looking foolish for a long period of time until no longer do you look foolish. And I think that means a lot of comfort from within and confidence from within rather than from external validation, which is, I think, a quest we can all set off on. Astro, I want to spend so much more time with you. You are an absolutely, I mean, one of the most interesting people I've ever met. I feel like you should be on some poster somewhere. Everybody out there, if you want to learn more about everything that's happening at X's Moonshot Factory, download the podcast, listen to all the incredible ideas. I had an absolute pleasure going through the list of just incredible things: air and water from the sky, solving our water problem from the oceans, climate change. I mean, it's really incredible, the big out there ideas you are working on and making reality. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. That was an absolute blast, and you're on for that lunch.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll be back with another episode of Inspired with Alexa Von Tobel soon. Thank you.